Hello, all you patriots. Patriot James here with Patriot Catfishers of America. Today, we're tying catfish rigs, mainly for bank fishing, but it also can be used on the boat. The first one that I've done tied, and I will show you how to tie the knots for this rig. And you see I use a pool noodle to wrap it around and hold it in place. You just unroll it, get to the next piece, take it loose, and then I cut a slit. You'll see I cut a slit all the way down through there. You slide your weight inside or a fitting to wrap it up. I'm using just a small weight on this for demonstration purposes only. And this is called a Kentucky rig, a 2-hook Kentucky rig. I always use a small swivel clasp at the bottom. Reason being, if you get your weight hung, your sinker hung, you can break this loose pretty easy before you break your line and lose your whole rig. So I use a small weak clasp at the bottom. Then I come up probably about a foot to my first hook. You can set it as close as you want. I usually try to go about a foot, just enough to keep his first hook off of the bottom. And when I tie it and put my hook on, I'll usually just slide the hook in there. I'll show you right quick. To slide it on. This keeps you from having to tie multiple knots and making your rig. Some people think multiple knots cause a rig to be weak, which I don't disagree or agree with that. I don't have a clue. I trust my knots. Then I flip it over and I pull it up tight. But I make sure that I put a bead on here. And what I usually do is take a toothpick. Usually I don't use these thick toothpicks. I use a little small wooden toothpick. But I don't like the way that hooks up on the bottom. So I pull it around the eye and pull it tight so it can't get a hold of that little bitty bent piece. I have to edit this out, part of this. And I pull it tight and I shove my bead right up against it, like so. Then I take a toothpick and I shove down in it, shove it in there pretty hard so that bead can't walk off. Push it in there hard, and then I break it off. That keeps that bead from walking off away from your knot, and it holds it in place. And it keeps it from walking off, and you got a bead in there. And then usually about another 8 to 12 inches, I do the same thing with the other one. But I've noticed that everybody that throws this from a boat or from the bank, usually the only time I'm throwing it from the bank is if I've got deeper water. So my line is angled down, and that means your hooks are up off of the bottom. But I never see anybody put a bobber above this top knot. I have, on all my rods, have bobber stops. And the reason I do that is that I can change different rigs or run a bobber. So I put a bobber stop on the line. But with the Kentucky rig, I put this bobber above it. And then I put a bobber stop maybe a foot above this last hook. Reason being is that bobber, and I just leave it sliding. It slides up and down. It'll slide up to the bobber stop. And then this will hold your rig up and down. And if you're fishing off the bank, it's going to be at an angle. This will help keep it up off of the bottom so your hooks don't get hung up. If you notice how I do this, how that thing is turned where the catfish hits it, it's going to turn right into the corner of his mouth. That is the first rig, the Kentucky rig, with a sliding bobber on the top. For this one, I'm showing you the Kentucky rig knot. It's a loop knot. You overlap them. One's going one way, one's going the other way. And then you separate them, and then you start twisting. You twist it. I'd like to twist it about 5 times, 5 to 7 times. Depends on what you're comfortable with. You twist them, one's going one way, one's actually going the other way. And then once you get that loop in the middle, you can see the loop. You see it's twisted on this side and it's twisted on that side. And then you take this loop that you started with and you stick it through there. And you pull it up, just like so. And you pull it tight. Whatever loop, however big you want this is how you need the biggest part of the loop you need to put it. I usually like to keep them about 4 to 6 inches. This one's probably about 3 inches. I didn't make it quite big enough, but I wanted to show you how to tie that knot. That knot will not slip. Then you got your place to put your hook right there. And that is the Kentucky rig knot. They've probably got a better name for it, but that's the knot I tie. Next is the Carolina rig. People have used the Carolina rig for many, many years. I use it on the boat, and I also use it off of the bank. Now most people use it with the no-roll sinkers. I use it with no rolls. Hopefully we have current, but in a lake most of the time we do not. When I tie my hooks, I use 8/0 to 10/0 Gamakatsus. Depends on if I can get the 10/0s. They're a little bit expensive, but I do snell my knots. Let me pull off enough to tie a leader and all with it. I missed it totally. And this is just 40-pound big game. I usually use 50-pound, but this is on an old reel. It was some of the line I pulled off a rod, so I save it for doing demonstrations. I do snell my knots. I stick the line through the back, hold it down, and I just use the simple snell knot. And I do it 7 times. 7 is a whole number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I hold it good and tight. And I come back through the back of the hook out the front. So it gives that hook the trigger effect. If you notice, when you hook it, it'll turn, and it'll turn and hook you. That's what they call the trigger effect. A lot of people are starting to use the reverse. But anyway, so we go, and I usually like to, wintertime, I go with a shorter leader. For this demonstration, I'm going to put it pretty short and put a swivel, a barrel swivel. Now, if you want to make a Santee Cooper rig with this, you take a bobber, just a peg float. That ain't got a hole in it. Let me find one that's got a hole in it. Here we go. You just take a peg float, slide it on your line before you tie your swivel on. If I can get it to go through. Now I had to shorten this up. Come on. And of course, when you're trying to make video, things don't work. You slide it through. It'll slide down to your hook. You can put it as close as you want. Put your bead in. I'm not going to take it off. I'm going to leave it on for tonight's show. But that's how you make a Carolina rig and a Santee Cooper rig. Swivel. And most of the time I will use, with a Santee rig, I will use one of the line rattles. The Whisker Seeker line rattles. And the knot that I tie is the uni knot. It's a knot that I trust. I've tied for many a year. I know quite a few professional fishermen that fished in catfish and bass tournaments. They love this knot. It's simple. You can tie it in the dark. But I use the uni knot. I'll show you that with a bigger piece of line. It's easier to show you. Right now I'm just going to get her done. It's a knot you can tie in the dark with your eyes shut once you learn how to use it. Swivel, bobber, hook. A plain Carolina rig, you won't have the bobber on there. You'll have just the hook. And then this is going to be your main line going back to your rod. The way I do it is that I put a bobber stop on my main line, and I'll show you why. Put a bobber stop and then a bead. Of course, I put a bead after my weight. I'll show you. And I'll put a bead above my weight. The bead above the weight will come to your bobber stop. I'm not going to waste a bobber stop on this. Let's tie a knot in it to demonstrate the bobber stop. There's the bobber stop. You come up and it'll hit, your bead will stop. Put your weight on. And you can use whatever knot that you trust. I just happen to trust the uni knot. Put your other bead. I use the rubber beads behind the weight so the weight don't beat up your knot. And then I tie a uni knot. And let me see if I can actually show you the uni knot. Sorry about that. Just pull it through. And I also do a double. I'll show you that in another video. You pull it up and you paint your line. And then you make a loop. And then you just pull that line back through that loop. I do 7 times. I always use the number 7. It's a whole number. You go through and see, you could do this with your eyes shut. One more. Grab your tag in. Oop, I let it slip. Tag in. Pull it down tight. And there you go. It locks down, and you actually can use this knot for a loop. Like a lot of people want to pull lures and stuff, and they want that little bitty loop on the end. This knot will lock down on your line and keep it from sliding against the lure eye, so you get that extra action. It's a great knot. It's one of the strongest knots that is the least damaging knot they are to your line. Sorry, let me back off here. Pull this back up now. There's the bobber stop. And the reason I show you, the reason I use the bobber stop is when you cast, a lot of times if you're throwing big baits, your bait will outrun your sinker. And it'll start pulling line all the way through, and your lead will be way up here away from your rig. So when it gets in the water, you got all this loose line. So what I do is I put a bobber stop on my line, and I'll pull it probably 12 to 16, 18 inches above my rig. So when I cast it, this lead can only go so far up the line and it'll stop. But yet it'll still give you that sliding action that you want from a Carolina rig. There you go, Carolina and Santee rig. For the next rig, it's basically a Santee Cooper rig, but with a fixed sinker that does not slide. What I do is I use a swivel like this, and you see I got my sinker on there, and it does not slide. It is fixed, and this is basically a Carolina rig or a Santee Cooper rig. You see my peg float on there. I got a line rattle on there. the hook, which that is a 10-aught Mad Catter's hook. Great hooks. They're real thick, but they're great hooks. I've not lost a fish actually since I started fishing with these. I've never lost a fish on it. Surprisingly, I was really surprised being as thick as it is. But anyway, back to the rig. So I always use a heavy swivel on this. Heavy barrel swivel with a hasp on it. That's a 2-ounce sinker. I usually use a 3 to 4 ounce sinkers to get my distance. If I don't have to go as far, throw in front of the bank, I'll use a lighter sinker. I try to get away with as light a sinker as I can so the fish does not feel that tension. That's why I kind of like the Carolina rig where it does slide. But you can actually tie this same rig, and instead of using a fixed weight, you'd put just a barrel swivel. I done got it tangled up. You put just a barrel swivel here. This piece will not be there. And then you put a sinker slide on your line. And I would also, on the sinker slide, use a rubber bead before the sinker slide goes on, and then a bobber stop bead afterwards. Make sure you have a bobber stop on that line. Remember what I told you, so your weight does not slide way up your line when you're trying to cast. That can cause you to get a bundle of line tangled up in your rig. But you can use the sinker slide instead of the fixed weight. Either way you want to do it. There's the sinker slide with the Carolina rig or the Santee rig. For this rig, it's a double hook rig, snelled. These are Gamakatsu 8-aught octopus circle hooks. I snell the first one like you normally do. I always put 6 turns in it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. Go through the back. Through the back, pull her tight. And then I noticed some people actually use a long tag end and tie it. This way, you don't have to. Run it through the back, out the front. Pull it down as close as you want to run your hooks. I usually like to run them maybe a little bit closer than that. Probably about 4 to 6 inches. No, about 4 to 5 inches, 3 to 4. Then you just snell it like you would a regular hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Run it through. Boop. Back up. And there's your double hook snell rig. For big baits, if you're throwing real big baits, or if catfish happen to be short hitting your baits, you can run this. Some people call this a stinger hook. And I also have what I call is a real stinger hook, is a big treble hook, because at certain times catfish seem like they short hit your bait. Pull it hard, but they never actually take that bait. They'll grab part of it. So what I started doing was taking a big hook, a piece of rubber worm, put part of it on, slide a big treble hook over it, and then put the rubber worm back on. And what that does, that holds that hook in place so it stands up and don't slide up and down and get in the way of anything. You can use different things for this right here. A rubber worm, usually everybody's got them. You can find them laying on the bank or whatever. And I put a stinger hook on. This has caught me one of my biggest flatheads I ever caught. I had some short hitting, and I was about 2 foot of water, probably 4 or 5 foot off the bank. This rod kept getting slammed, bam, and I was throwing big hand-sized brim. I reeled it back in, looked through, and I didn't want to cut my line. I needed to do this quick to get my bait back out there. And I knew I had some big treble hooks in my tackle box. So I put a worm on there, put a stinger hook on there. Next cast, boom, it wasn't out there 5 minutes, and the flathead grabbed it. And it was the stinger hook right here that actually caught the fish. So, guys, sometimes you got to think outside the box in order to catch the fish that you're chasing. For this next rig, I still use an 8/0 Gamakatsu or a 10/0. But this is what they call the Joey Kirby rig, or a redfish rig they use in saltwater. It's already made up rig. There's a piece of wire in the middle of it. It's a flexible piece of wire. You could probably tie one of these with, say, 100-pound test line and put your own little beads on there, little brass things, and you hear it makes quite a bit of noise. But you got a little bit bigger float than just a plain peg float. You can see how much bigger it is. This gives you more flotation up off of the bottom, and then you got your bait here. And you can tie it, a Carolina rig, slip float rig, a slip sinker rig, or just a fixed sinker rig. Or if you're on a boat, you could actually put a drifting sinker on there. But there's your rig, and I usually tie that about 18 to 24 inches, and that'll float your bait up off of the bottom. For the next one, I'll just use this double hook rig I just tied. For people that use demon dragons, or this is what I call the fake demon dragon, you hear it's got a little bitty rattle. It's just got a single rattle. It's actually a softer plastic, so it's not as loud. I do not tie extra knots. What I always do is I bend the eyes just a little bit. I run my line through there. I put the fat end towards the hook, the skinny end towards the rod, and I slide it however far I want up on the line, and then I put a piece of electrical tape around it, and that keeps this from moving up and down your line. And then you could tie it with a fixed sinker or a Carolina rig with a sliding sinker, or with a sinker slide, just a sinker slide, however you choose to rig it. But that is the demon dragon, or the fake demon dragon, which is basically just a Santee rig with a rattle. And the last rig I want to show you is probably one of my most favorite rigs to use, especially when I'm fishing shallow water and not fishing that many rods, mainly because you have to be a line watcher. And on this rig, what I've made up my mind about is that it's a single hook rig, a snella hook. A lot of times I'll use J hooks for this, but for sakes, this is a Gamakatsu circle hook. And what I'll do is tie maybe up from there about 16 to 24 inches, just a barrel swivel. Tie it on there. I just tied this other knot just for sake of time. And get my hands to work right. I think this is a clinch knot, I'm not sure. I tied that one knot so much that I don't remember the names of the other. Tie it on there. And this is free. I use this for free lining. I tie a barrel swivel on there to help keep this from, it'll tumble. In the current, if you got a little bit of current, it will tumble. And you tie that swivel on there to keep from your lines being all twisted up and tangled up. And what I'll do on my main line is I will put a peg float. But I do not use a bobber stop for this. I just let it slide up and down the line. The reason is when you're throwing no weight and just a hook and bait, a lot of times it's hard to keep up with your line where it is. So if you put a peg float on there, it'll slide to the surface of the water, and you'll always know basically where your line is at all times. But with this rig, you really need to be a line watcher, because that fish might take your bait and run back towards you, and if you're not watching your line, you'll never see it because he won't pull down on your rod. But free lining can be very, very productive when they up in shallow water and feeding on brim, shad, or whatever in shallow waters. Try it. Joe from Chat Cats uses it a lot. He likes using chicken breast with his in deeper water, just letting it around the dam and letting it float through with the current. I haven't tried that yet. I have used it around bridges when I was bank fishing, because there was so much debris around the bridge that if you throw the sinker or whatever to pull it to the bottom, it will get hung up. Free lining, I would throw it up current and let it just that bait will just kind of drift down through the current, give it a real natural presentation to the fish, and they will gobble it up. But you have to be a line watcher when you're free lining.